Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing with myself, Matty Hewitt, Joe Ramage. I was going to do a pause, like they're doing, like you say, your name is could be some dynamic double act, but I'll save that.
Yeah. How's it going? You all right?
Yeah, good. You?
Yeah, I'm not bad. I'm still just about clinging on to sort of the New Year's resolution of trying to get out for a walk in the morning. So
yeah, I've pied that one off this morning. I've let my missus take the dog out, so it's a good start. Good start. Yeah. We are Sunderland. Obviously, we are in partnership with the Farm Museum, also in partnership with Cospex Opticians, who've recently come on board. New site, been up and going for about 2 months. Place to be for everything red and white, tactical analysis, exclusive interviews, and expert opinion. You can subscribe for just £1 for 6 months worth of coverage. All the details is over on our site. Let's get into it with Joe. Swansea. What did you make of the game as a whole, first of all?
I think, you described it as a game of two halves, didn't you, yesterday? I'll go along with that a little bit, but I mean, the first half was really, really poor. It's probably as bad as I've seen Sunderland for some time, to be honest. It was just, they were just all over the shop, to be honest. Now, I'll counter that by, I will say, I thought Swansea were excellent in the first half in particular. I thought they were really, really good, and they totally nullified anything that Sunderland could do. But the setup for me was, Mike Dodds said it, didn't he? That it was wrong. Doesn't take an expert to acknowledge that, but it was really wrong. It was as though it was the players were confused from the off. We were sitting up there, and even sort of 5 or 10 minutes in, I think we were still posing the question to each other, weren't we? Sort of, how are Sunderland setting up here? Because there was, you had the back three, but then in front of that, there was so many sort of interchanging parts, and everyone was moving around to the point where it was just confusing. It was confusing on the eye, and I think it was confusing for the players as well. And that ultimately showed in what ended up being a really poor first 45 minutes. And they were 2-0 down. They were really fortunate that it wasn't 3, 4, 5, to be honest, because Swansea they cut through them at will. They were outnumbering them. The turnovers, that was one thing that really surprised me, even with the change of system. Sort of players who are quite notoriously reliable in possession, like Dan Neil and Pierre Ekwa, they were giving the ball away really easy. Now, looking back through it, you can see that Swansea were outnumbering them two in midfield in particular, but the turnovers were a real concern, and they just couldn't get to grips with it. They could not get to grips with it. Ronald on the wing was really impressive. Obviously got the 2 goals as well, but he positioned himself really well in between sort of Hjelde and Styles, who just didn't really have that synergy on the left, did they, as a new partnership. I think Styles was a difficult debut for him, certainly in the first half, until he moved out over onto the wing. And it was just it was too muddled, it was too confusing, and the players didn't really seem to buy into what they were being instructed to do. And I think Dodds, he just about acknowledged, didn't he, that he probably overcomplicated it, if we're being honest, trying to maybe build on sort of what he did in December, specifically that Leeds game. Now, I know obviously there was some changes that were enforced. Obviously, Jack Clark missing out, Dan Ballard suspended, which is going to force your hand a little bit. But yeah, he was probably trying to be a little bit too clever with it, maybe. And Swansea, they were really good and read it, and they were full value for the win for me, because, like I said, it could have been outside at half time. Second half, there was a reaction. I think it had to be. It couldn't be as bad, really. But even then, it was. You kind of fell back into what has been the story of this season, where they didn't really have that sort of cutting edge in the final third, and obviously without Jack Clark, where you don't have that invention, that creativity, that spark. There wasn't really a lot going forward. I don't think Rushworth in goal had much to do, did he? So, yeah, it was a really disappointing afternoon, and one that, obviously the playoffs are still there until they're mathematically not, but it certainly feels as though they're probably going to be gone now.
Yeah, just on that first half, it was pretty calamitous, wasn't it? There's no getting away from how poor that first half performance was. What's interesting, obviously, is there's been plenty of talk about the inconsistencies of Sunderland this season. And while I do acknowledge, I think Mike Dodds is right, that there was different reasons behind why the game against Swansea had in different halves. I do think a lot of that is down to the shape, as you say. I think they just the wingers of, I think it was Placheta and Ronald, just got in down the sides far too easily. And I think what was interesting was that Mike Dodds was confident. He says, "Look, I wouldn't have sent the players out there if I didn't, if I wasn't 100% certain that they knew the game plan." Now, I found that pretty interesting. And he went on to talk about structure as well, didn't he? Say how we had more men behind the ball, which in theory, that is what paid dividends when Sunderland came up against Leeds in his previous tenure. They were more structured. All right, they had a back three, back five, but you had the two outlets and wingers in Clark, and I think it was Barr on that occasion. And I think that as well is something that Michael Beale spoke about before he went, is trying to impose a bit more structure into Sunderland when either they don't have the ball. Now, okay, you can argue that it hasn't worked, and in part that was why Michael Beale went. But I'd question is the underlying issues there, because Mike Dodds came out and says, it was the mentality of the first half performance that was a cause for concern. Now, he doesn't think that is, an issue for the entire group, but it was in that first half. Now, I found that pretty interesting. What did you make of that?
Yeah, it was, because I think to everyone else it was a concern. I get where he's coming from in terms of that he sort of, I think he put it as he could see the wood through the trees this time, couldn't he?
Yeah.
Which I guess it depends which side of the fence you sit on here, because you can give him a little bit of credit for being bold, as he said that he was going to be.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to make bold decisions in my time in the seat, and that was certainly a bold decision. But then I think it was so clear inside 10 minutes, 15 minutes that it wasn't working. That it could have been changed there and then, and it wasn't until I went 2-0 down where there was even sort of where it did get Styles came over to the right towards the end of the first half, didn't he? So it's a different one. You can understand why fans are frustrated with that, because, like I say, I think pretty much Mike Dodds would have seen it as well. He could see that it wasn't working, but to wait until you're 2-0 down, it's a difficult situation to put yourself in, isn't it, to try and get back into a game. What will be interesting is how he goes this weekend against Norwich, whether that is something that he's learned from, and because Sunderland did look a bit more comfortable when they were back in the sort of the 4-3-3 or the 4-2-3-1, which is, so we've seen variations of that over the last few weeks with Michael Beale, haven't we? That first half just didn't work, just didn't get going.
Yeah, what's interesting as well is how we're going to try and decipher how they did set up in that first half, because from the outset we had a guess and we thought there'd be 2 10s. It was actually Barr and Rusin as like it was like a 3-5-2 with Job as a 10. However, Job pushed forward to then act as a striker with Rusin and Barr splitting. But then there was confusion in that Job, it appeared anyway, that he didn't know when to drop in. I think he probably changed it twice. I think he probably changed it to a 3-4-3 from a 3-5-2 and then into the 4, because there was a period midway through the first half where Job was central as a striker. Now, there was plenty of talking points coming into it, wasn't it? Would we see Styles as a left wing back? Would we see Rusin either play up front or play off the wing? On the latter of those two, I don't think we actually got to see the best of that as a trial.
No, we didn't. I mean, we've heard about Rusin playing across the forward line, in recent weeks under Michael Beale, but I think the suggestion was that it would be from the left. So when him going out on the right, that in itself was a bit of a surprise. Yeah. But I think you're right in terms of Job. It was so different in and out of possession, which is fair enough. A lot of teams and a lot of coaches will do that. But it was amplified so much. You had Trey Hume jumping into midfield, Styles on the other side tucking in, which then left the space for the wing. Yeah. The overloads on the wings, which is where the first goal came from. But even going back and watching it, I think within 20 seconds, when the teams were set up at kick-off, you could sort of see the 3 centre-backs, the 2 wing-backs, and then those in front. But within about 20 seconds, it was lopsided where they got in down the left-hand side. So it was straight away from the bat, you could see that it was a little bit disjointed. And like I said, I know that Hume has done that quite a lot this season in terms of tucking in and being that spare man in midfield. I don't know. Again, I just don't know if it's a case of, and this isn't just Mike Dodds because it's happened all season. It's been Michael Beale and Tony Mowbray who've done this, just overcomplicating things a little bit. Sometimes you just want your fullback or your wing back to be your fullback or your wing back, especially if when you're missing key players like a Jack. If you haven't got a Jack Clark on the other side, sometimes you just need that simplicity. For me, and I know it's obviously easy to say that in hindsight because of the way that the game went, but yeah, sometimes I think a lot of coaches and managers they do overcomplicate things by doing that. And up front was exactly the same in terms of I don't think Bar and Rusin knew when all the time when to stay wide and drop in when Job was dropping in and out of being a 9 and a 10, so to speak. And it was like say from the back, it was just all a little bit disjointed in the first half as well. I mean, the one thing you would say is you'd like to think that they'll sit and watch all the clips through this week.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to pick apart what was sort of wrong with how they set up and how things went, and what could they do, because you could see I know Dodds was saying that it was an aggressive approach, and when you look at it, there is quite high press with Hume popping up into that midfield spot.
Yeah.
And I think Grimes might have been the target man where once he got it, he was the trigger for people to press. But if he could flick the ball around, you were taking 5 or 6 men out. And the amount of times that Swansea were getting 3v3 or outnumbering the centre backs, it was it was far too often in the first half. And like I say, they could have been 3, 4, 5 up, and it was, I mean, like I say, they addressed it at half time, but the damage was already done at that point.
Yeah, you spoke about the simplicity there, and I think it's something we touched on just during the game as well, up in the press box. It was Swansea were really good, weren't they? But they didn't overcomplicate it, I don't think. I think one player in particular for them, and it's obviously not a Swansea City podcast, but I thought Joe Allen just ran the show. And in turn, that only strengthens the claim of he's an experienced player. And Sunderland didn't have the nous, I don't think, in midfield. And I've been full of praise for the likes of Dan Neil. I just think it was I'm not singling him out for any criticism in particular, because I think the whole team had an off day and it was really difficult to pick out a star performer. But in the midfield area, I think Pierre Ekwa was probably Sunderland's best player on the day, more so in the second half. But Joe Allen just absolutely ran the show. I think he picks up the ball for the second goal, doesn't he? That loose pass, he just jumps on it. He just knew when to go. Played in Ronald, there you go, 2-0. It was so simple to watch, yet it just worked effortlessly.
Yeah, you've took the words out of my mouth there. If you go back and watch that second goal, as soon as Sealt wins the ball, because I think it's Grimes who clears it away from that press that I've just mentioned about. Sealt wins it, drops it back to 09. Alan knows that that's going to go in to Neil, and you can see him charging from 15 yards away. Neil looks over his shoulder, but he still can't do anything about it, because when the pass comes in, it's a little bit wayward, and he's on it, and then they outnumber them again. And you're right in what you're saying, that was a common theme throughout the first half, where they were able to just jump on either Ekwa or Neil, who, like I said, you often associate being quite tidy in possession, and certainly Neil over recent weeks, like you say, we've praised him a lot in terms of his ball retention. They just couldn't cope with it, and Alan was the instigator in that press, without a doubt.
I mean, as you've touched on there, it's Norwich coming up next. Now, obviously, a direct rival would be difficult enough, let alone it's on the road. So it's not something that Sunderland have fared well with. And I think, obviously, speaking to Mike Dodds after the game, he was still pretty annoyed about the defeat of Bristol City on the road. That would have been one of very few wins had he been able to get his way and come away with 3 points. But it's another obstacle. And I wonder how long it goes on until it starts to become a thing in the mind of players where, we haven't won away in however knows how long.
Yeah, it would be something where I'd say, it might not be such a bad thing being away from home after Saturday, because I think there was a little bit of an uplifting mood after, what happened last week with the change of head coach. I think there was a lot of sort of support and rallying around Mike Dodds getting put back in charge. I think a lot of people might have said that should have happened in December. Obviously, the way that it went, it became frustrating again for supporters. So normally I would have said, it's not necessarily a bad thing going away from home. But you touched on it there, the away form this season, it becomes really daunting. I suppose, rightly or wrongly, you could say that the pressure's almost off Sunderland now, because 8 points adrift, it feels as though they're a long way out of going to being able to make a challenge for that top 6. So you can go into these 3 games, and like I say, they're probably not expected to get anything, lost 3 in a row now, and you're coming up against teams that are in form. It's a difficult run, even if Sunderland are in form. These 3 games would have been really tough. So when you're out of form and everything that's going on, they're still without Dan Ballard at the weekend. We don't know yet on Jack Clarke. I don't want to say it's a free hit because Sunderland are still, while it's mathematically possible, which it's going to be for another couple of weeks yet, but it does almost feel as though it is a bit of a free hit going into these games. Just try and make something happen, and probably be typical Sunderland to go and get a result in one of these games when you're not expecting it. Just to sort of keep those hopes alive, wouldn't it? We've seen that in recent seasons. I think Norwich last season had been a case in point. It was a similar sort of time in the year. They went down there, sort of in and around, and then you go to a difficult place like Carrow Road, and then they came away with a 1-0 win. Wouldn't be on the realms of possibility that something like that could happen. But yeah, from the outside, it doesn't feel as though that would be the case. Would have gone into it.
Yeah, it's something that I know you've spoken about a lot on here, that particularly after the Borough game, there's a sense of inevitability around it where I don't think I've been full of optimism for them and thinking that they'll fit in, but I think after that display and the 3 games in particular, you've got to win those types of games against teams in the bottom half if you are to really, stamp your authority on that top 6. And I think you've just been nailed on the head with that. I think, interestingly as well, you posed the question about Jack Clarke after the game. There was some interesting comments there from Mike Dodds, and I know you've done a bit on the website today.
Yeah, it was just a case of, we guessed that, well, Dodds, he pretty much confirmed that Clarke was going to be missing, proved to be the case. So who's going to step up? I was quite surprised. I don't know what you were, I was quite surprised that Ramage Mundell didn't start.
Yeah, I was too.
I know we touched on it in the team news video that we did. I thought he might have kept his spot. Now I think, looking at it, obviously that was probably a bit more tactically rather than sort of because of his performance, with them coming narrow and staying wide. But did any of them set up? No, they probably didn't. I mean, Mundell came on in the second half and they were better in the second half. He put a really good cross in actually later on where, classic case of what we've spoken about all season, that striker gambling and box being in the right place at the right time. But I thought his answer was really good, to be honest, with that. And it made a lot of sense in terms of the Jack Clarke that we see now isn't the Jack Clarke that Sunderland signed 2 years ago on loan. And he's absolutely right about that. Jack Clarke had a couple of failed loans in the Championship before he found a bit of a home here. He came in on loan, and then he wasn't exactly the first name on the team sheet every week in the end of that League One campaign. He was on the bench in the playoff final. So the first 6 months, you could even say the first 12 months, because the first half of last season, it was, his numbers didn't really pick up until the second half of last season when Stewart got injured. There was a bit more of an emphasis on him and Amad Diallo. That was when he really kicked on. The last 12 months, what he's done to develop his game and just improve it and go from level to level to level has been absolutely outstanding, to be honest. And that is why Sunderland are going to lose him in the summer to a higher level, and why teams like Lazio, who are in the Champions League, are interested in him because of what he's done over the last 12 months. So can you expect a player who's just come in, who's obviously not as much experience as him in the Championship, hasn't had that sort of grounding, if you like, to come in and off the bat and perform like how he would produce that moment of magic, that spark, that invention? No, it probably is unrealistic. I think the problem is then it doesn't help Sunderland in this case, does it, in the here and now, which has been the issue in the model, in the approach, getting the balance right between getting these players who, yes, in 12 to 18 months' time might be able to follow what Jack Clarke's done on that trajectory, and then balancing it out with players who can come in and make a bit of an impact now. And it was really interesting, and I think he's right to say that. I think Mundell in particular, he's very raw, but he's shown signs that he could be decent. Can he get to the levels and the numbers that Clarke's at? That would be difficult anyway, because he's a bit of an anomaly, isn't he? He's been that good this season. Barr would be the one that you'd think would be closest, because I think he's only 6 months behind Clarke in terms of when he came into the building. But he's 3 years younger than him. He's moving over. He's only had this time in the Championship, even though those loans were classed as struggles or failures for Clarke. It was still experience in this division. Roosen sort of thrown into that category as well, but he only came in the summer. So it is difficult and probably a little bit harsh to expect any of those three, of a Barr, Roosen or a Mundell, to fill in exactly as what Sunderland would miss with Clarke being out. But that's where they've got to get to. And the worry would be, based on Saturday, it's quite a long road, isn't it, until you get someone even close to sort of what Clark can do in terms of his impact in the game, and just what a huge miss, which you knew he would be anyway, but it kind of rubber stamped how big of a miss and how much of an impact he is. And it's not just his goals and assists, it's just occupying that space out on the left. You know, I think Luke Williams spoke about the game plan, didn't he? In terms of how did he set Swansea up, how he thought Sunderland would play, you know, with Clark not being available. And he couldn't have guessed how Sunderland were going to play. And a lot of that is with Clark not being there, because if he had been there, game plans are probably dictated around him. You know, you'll throw 2 men over there to cover him, whereas he didn't necessarily have to do that on Saturday because he wasn't there. That threat isn't perceived to be there, and it proved to be the case.
Yeah, just a little injury update as well. I think Mike Dodds said that he'd be assessed on Monday, isn't it? And just to see if he'll be fit for Norwich. But that was you know, the injury there isn't as bad as what I think Mike Dodds said was made out on social media. There's no way, or there wasn't at least any suggestion that he'd be out for a month. More so just a couple of weeks, I think, if that, and he could be back in contention for Norwich.
That would be the hope, yeah. Obviously, especially with Ballard still being out. And I think with Ballard being out as well, you noticed him being missing, certainly that first half, because what was it? I think the XG, Swansea had a 2.14 XG at half time. Right. I think I looked at it, that would have been their 4th highest over the 90 minutes this season, and that was just in 45 minutes. So that tells you how much of a loss that Ballard was as well. But yeah, like I say, Clark, the hope is that he will get training again this week and he'll be back in, even if he's just on the bench, you know, if you don't want to risk him because of like what I touched on before in terms of possibly being a free hit. You can maybe save him for Leicester on the Tuesday night back up at the Stadium of Light. But yeah, the sooner both of them get back, the better for Sunderland, no doubt.
Just on the Ballard absence, obviously it was difficult as well to judge Jensen Seal, I thought, because as we say, that first half they were just at sea. That was another game where I think Jensen Seal's found himself in the team. The result hasn't gone the way, you know, Sunderland wanted to with him in the side, and it's just a really difficult game to judge him on, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, and I think part of that is obviously the setup in terms of the wing backs. Yeah. You know, because of how much they moved, whether it be pressing so high forward or tucking inside, it left that space either side of Fjelde on the left and Seal on the right, and they were getting drawn out, and that was why they were getting outnumbered. So, and obviously in that situation, it is going to be difficult for you. And again, I think it also shows how much Ballard is missed, you know, and just organising that. You know, Luke O'Nien was in there, sort of trying to command and captain them, but even he's been good of late. He was off the pace a little bit as well. You know, obviously it was his passing for the second one as well. But yeah, it was a difficult afternoon for Sale, but it was a difficult afternoon defensively, and I think part of that was, well, I think a lot of that was down to the fluctuating system. Yeah,
and then interestingly, we'll end on this. Reports linked Alex Neil with a bit of a sensational return back to the club yesterday. I mean, if you read into actually, you know, what was said, he wouldn't rule out, or he wouldn't say no to a return. But I think that's probably just agent talk, isn't it? Because the manner in which he departed, Sunderland fans have rightly pointed out on social media. Yes, he did a brilliant job when he was here, took them up. It was the manner of the departure which I think left a sour taste in the mouth. Hasn't worked out at Stoke City. Wanted more sort of control over the transfers. For me, it's not something that I think Sunderland would look to go back to. But hey, I've been surprised before.
Yeah, you can never say never with Sunderland, it seems. But I'd be hugely surprised if there's any substance in that, other than, like you say, just a little bit of agent talk with Neil leaving Stoke. The bridge, it would be hard to repair that bridge, I think, given the exit. You know, you have to remember that he was still employed by Sunderland when he was at Hewitt Park watching Stoke that day that Sunderland played Norwich. You know, that would be hard for supporters to get on board with. You know, I know Tony Mowbray came in, and the rest is history in terms of the job that he did. And Alex Neil did a really good. You know, it's because of Alex Neil that the club got out of League One. You know, he sort of instilled that camaraderie, that cohesion, and you know, he ended up getting them out of League One. But the way that it ended, was really sour, and it will be really difficult for supporters to get on board, I think, for him coming back. But it's difficult as well in terms of, like you said, you question the model. he questioned not being able to bring his own players in. Now, I think some people might turn and say, well, he got that autonomy at Stoke and didn't work out well for him. Why would he then come back and put himself in the situation that he disagreed with before? You know what I mean? He's not the only manager / head coach who's been in a situation who were questioning it. Mowbray's done it. Beale did it to an extent as well. That is the structure that is in place at the club. If he didn't agree with it before, I don't see why he would agree with it now. So, yeah, I don't think it necessarily adds up for a return, but I've been wrong before. And, you know, I mean, like I say, that this club can do strange and wonderful things at the same time, but it seems a long shot for me, a very long shot.
Yeah, spot on, Joe. Thanks very much. We'll wrap it up there. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Make sure you've got your notification bell turned on, so when we go live on videos like this, you can tune in and have a watch. We are Sunderland, obviously, still. Subscribe, £1 for just 6 months worth of coverage. We've been in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cost Specs Opticians. We'll catch you again later during the week.